Hello, I'm Jo. I'm Head of Parent Services at YoungMinds.
I'm Emma. I'm the Helpline Manager.
And we're going to be talking to you about anger. Now, anger is one of our top 3 topics that we hear parents talk to us on the helpline about. It's a massive issue and a massive cause for concern. Emma, when we talk about anger, what is it we're actually talking about?
Anger is just an emotion, and I think we automatically associate anger with negativity and a bit of stigma. But the truth is, anger can be a really natural and really understandable and valid emotional response to all sorts of different things. And I think if somebody said to me, Emma, when was the last time you felt angry? I'd probably say, oh, probably in the last day or the last week. So I think it's just an emotion like sadness or joy or frustration.
And it's a response sometimes to frustration, isn't it, when things that go wrong shouldn't have gone wrong. So it's completely normal to feel that.
It is. I mean, anger is such a normal reaction. It can be caused by anything, in fact. So, you know, if a child is at school, if they're being bullied, if they're having problems with a teacher, with peers, at home, perhaps there's a bit of sibling rivalry, absolutely anything can cause that underlying frustration and anger. Equally, if a child has got perhaps a developmental problem, they may have speech and language problems, there may be communication difficulties, which of course would cause frustration. And what we know is that behaviour is very much a form of communication. So when children are angry, what's really useful from a parent perspective is to always think about tapping into what are they communicating.
So how much of a problem can it be, and when it becomes a problem, what does it look like?
Okay, so really good question there, because, you know, well, I've started off by saying that anger can be healthy, and actually it can be a driving force for change. It can be a point where I say, oh, I'm really, really unhappy about being bullied, I'm going to do something, I'm going to tell my mum, I'm going to talk to a teacher. But I think anger begins to become a problem for children and young people if they start to feel consumed by angry feelings. If they either feel a desire to really do something about those feelings and act on it in a negative way, or they actually are acting out in a negative way. So it's just when it starts to impact everyday life and relationships.
And can anger be different for different age groups? Are there different expectations about how anger manifests for different age children?
Well, younger ones, if you've got your sort of twos, they're going to have terrible twos, so they're going to have loads and loads of tantrums. And, you know, it can be awful to deal with that as a parent, but it might be developmentally normal. So you may not want to sort of panic and think, oh, this is an anger problem, I need to do something about it. You may want to just think about your star charts, your sort of how are you disciplining, your naughty stare, you know, all of that stuff. But if you've got a teenager who's being really angry, you're going to approach it really differently and set some real boundaries and expectations.
And what about children? We do hear quite often parents call the helpline who say their children are angry in different situations, so they can be absolutely fine at home but really just constantly get into fights at school. Or the reverse can be true, that actually they're just taking it out in a home situation, they're picking on siblings, they're threatening parents. Why does that happen sometimes?
Well, first of all, I've had so many parents in the helpline personally tell me that story and share that, and it really resonates. But I always like to draw out the positives from that. So I think if a child or young person is able to manage their feelings and emotions in one setting and not the other, actually what we can pull out from that positively is that, well, clearly they don't have sort of ADHD or a developmental problem, because the behaviours you would certainly expect them to be consistent across all settings. But also, if I as a young person can control my behaviour at school, then I certainly can learn how to behave at home as well. So there are some real positives, but I think the tricky bit is sort of unpicking it and going, why? Like, how does that make sense? So I often think, right, well, if a child can behave really, really well at school, but they come home and immediately they're explosive and there's massive rows and massive temper tantrums, I'm wondering what's happening at school. Now, it may not be that there is a huge problem, it could be that they're just really struggling with their learning. They might have an underlying learning difficulty that hasn't been picked up and diagnosed, they might have had a fight with somebody at school, or simply sometimes they're just concentrating and they're trying so hard to be liked by the teacher, to really sort of attain and do everything really, really well, and by the time they get home, their resilience has dropped a bit, they're feeling exhausted and a bit irritable, and all of that comes out as frustration and anger.
And what can parents do, so in terms of how parents can respond when they're dealing with what they feel like is disproportionate anger?
Well, first of all, I suppose that key word that you said, disproportionate, is so true. So I think it goes back to children and young people, that their feelings are so valid, but often, particularly teenagers, have a tendency to act it out disproportionately, and as a parent, that can feel really difficult to respond to. But what I want to give parents watching this is some really practical tips on how to actually behave, what to do, how to respond to anger. And I think the most important thing is just about, on a basic level, separating out feelings from behaviour. That if you can just do that and say, actually, darling, I really understand you're feeling angry, you have every right to feel that way, that is completely valid. But then say, but actually what I have a problem with is how you're acting out. That's the differentiating bit. And I also think just try not to mirror the anger. In the face of provocation, that's a little bit harder than it sounds, and it's really difficult. But what can help is just your tone. You know, when you're talking to your teenager or your adolescent, just keep it neutral, keep it firm. That really helps. Think about your boundaries as well. So even before an episode, what are your boundaries? How do you hold your boundaries? And how do you sort of parent it in a really consistent way? And also, if you're in the middle of an episode, or even after an episode where there's been outbursts, try where possible not just to ask question after question. If it's a kind of how, what, why, when, it just becomes argumentative, and you can fuel off each other in quite a destructive and negative way. So just taking a step back, being led by your child, but also thinking about, all right, well, could we do anything around physical activity? Because what we know about endorphins is, if once a child or young person is involved in, say, five-a-side football, boxercise, running, no matter what it is, that activity will release endorphins, which will have a really good impact on their mood, which will be elevated. So that's one thing that can be really useful. Secondly, I would also say, just let them figure out what works for them. You know, in terms of self-soothing techniques, it could be things like having a really nice soak in the bath, listening to music, watching a film, having a sort of 20-minute period where they're just doing mindfulness exercises on their own, even in a dark, quiet space. So whatever works for them.
Brilliant. I think you said something really interesting around boundaries. So we hear from a lot of parents who, if they're concerned their child has a mental health issue, they are really fearful of imposing house rules, and actually then parents lose confidence, and actually that then makes everything really shaky for the child, because then they don't really understand. Do you want to sort of say a bit more about that?
Yeah, it becomes this cyclical, ironic situation, because when a child is feeling angry, there's a sense of being frightened and really overwhelmed and feeling really out of control. And the one thing that a child or young person needs in that situation is the stability that comes from knowing where you stand with your parents, and knowing when you're going to be really told off, when you know you've stepped out of line and really pushed those buttons. So, often, not even about anger, but often on our helpline, we hear from parents who have a child who's self-harmed, and they say, oh my God, I can't possibly tell her off, I can't discipline, because she'll come down from the stairs, she'll say she's cut herself and it's all my fault, it's going to be all my fault. And what we often say to parents is, actually, that is exactly what you should be doing. It's about retaining your parental authority, setting those consistent boundaries, basically not changing the rules.
Because the young person is in a position to be determining what should and shouldn't happen.
Absolutely.
And when should parents be thinking about risk and then talking to other services and kind of who helps, who's out there that can help?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I would say risk is an interesting word, because sometimes you can have anger without any kind of risk element and still make a decision, I think I need to talk to some people. So my advice would always be, if you're a parent in this situation, please do talk to your GP and the school. Schools can be, when it works well, schools can be a fantastic source of support, often have counselling services, pastoral support, and they want to really sort of understand what challenges the family are really experiencing. The GPs often will have that sort of mental health perspective. They may not be experts, they may not be highly trained in mental health, but they can be a referral point to specialist professionals and child and adolescent mental health services. There are lots of children and people who are angry who don't need mental health provision as well. So we're not here sort of labelling or saying that if you've got an angry child, you definitely need professional help. But I think it's just about knowing that it's okay to have the conversation. It's okay to say, a bit out of my depth, I'm not sure how much of a problem is this. Should I be
But parents can also learn, can't they, and plan and actually think through how they're going to be responding when they put in these situations.
Absolutely. And I think when it comes to risk, the critical thing is to think about, has the anger already escalated into violence? Has it escalated to violence towards myself as a parent or towards other children at home? How old are they? How am I able to intervene and mitigate that risk? And you may not be able to, because some of these situations are pretty chronic. And
I don't think we can talk about things like anger and violence without thinking, where is there that line when we need to think about talking to the police, and actually what role do the police have in those situations?
I think I would urge every parent in the situation to think long and hard about where their boundary is and at what point they would make that decision to take that action. And I would urge, if you're listening to this thinking, oh my God, it's like you're talking to me personally, you're calling out to me. It is really difficult, but think about your child's age and their development. Context is everything. If you've got somebody that's 6, 7, 8 years of age, the chances are you're not going to go down that route.
No.
And it would feel very sort of overreactive. But if you've got a teenager who is quite strong, quite aggressive, quite threatening, has been violent or is threatening violence, think about who are the threats towards. Is it yourself? Are there any vulnerabilities? How scared are you? You know, how do you feel you're going to be able to protect yourself? If there's a child or young person, you're probably going to be even more concerned.
And of course people don't talk about that, and parents don't talk about it, and people don't talk to their friends about that. So
yeah, it's a hidden problem.
It's just a hidden problem, and there is so much shame around that and so much guilt on parents' part, and you feel like you've betrayed your child and you failed as a parent. But actually we hear from parents every day that we work, violence and aggression is one of our top topics.
We do, and I think the reality is that calling the police doesn't have to be synonymous with criminalising your child. And it's about having to think about, what do I want them to do?
Yeah.
So what is my boundary? At what point will I make a decision to contact the police? And if I make contact, I need to articulate, what do I want you to do? And it could be, I want you to have an off-the-record conversation with my child, because maybe that will reset something up here. Maybe that will make the difference. They will start to think, oh my goodness, I'm out of
And they can
control.
respond, from what we hear from parents, in so many different ways. They can be incredibly supportive. They see this isn't criminal behaviour, this is a child that needs help, and actually they do have those powers. You know, that they can be a real sort of specialist and be a real sort of lifesaver.
They really can.
Yeah, they can be really understanding. So just to go back, do you want to recap your top tips for parents then, in terms of what parents can do and how parents can respond to anger?
Definitely, and I'm just going to, for the benefit of anybody that's just started listening now, I'm just going to now sort of really shorten this down to 5 key points. So if you're a parent of a child and you're struggling to respond and manage their anger, the top 5 priorities are, firstly, just separate out their feelings which are valid from negative behaviours and how they're acting it out, that's the real challenge and difficulty. Try really hard not to mirror their anger, limit the questions you're asking them, stick to your boundaries, and plan ahead. Plan what to do if it escalates.
Brilliant. Thank you, Emma. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.